Most people assume respect is loud. They imagine it in raised voices, firm handshakes, dominating presence, or people who fill every silence with confidence that borders on performance. The common belief is simple: if you want to be respected, you must project power. Speak more, assert more, prove more. Yet if you quietly observe environments where genuine respect exists, boardrooms, negotiation tables, elite teams, calm leaders, during tense moments, a different pattern begins to appear. On the individuals who command the most respect often speak the least. They rarely rush their words. They do not interrupt every silence. And when they do speak, the room tends to adjust around them. This creates an interesting paradox. Respect does not necessarily grow louder. As authority grows, in many cases it becomes quieter, more measured, more intentional, not because the person lacks confidence, but because they no longer need noise to prove it. But many people spend years attempting to build authority through volume, speed, and constant expression. But over time, experience tends to reveal something deeper about human perception. People do not only evaluate what you say, they evaluate how you occupy space. They evaluate how comfortable you appear in silence. They evaluate whether your words arrive with clarity or with urgency. Urgency often signals insecurity. Clarity tends to signal stability. And stability is something humans instinctively respect. This does not mean speaking softly guarantees respect. Human behavior is far too complex for guarantees. But calm communication often increases the likelihood that people perceive you as composed, grounded, and deliberate. And those qualities tend to attract trust. Consider two individuals entering a tense conversation. The first person speaks quickly. Their tone is firm, but their pace suggests they are trying to secure control before anyone challenges them. Their sentences stack on top of each other. They explain, justify, clarify, repeat. They fill every gap. The second person speaks more slowly, not dramatically, slow, simply measured. They pause between ideas. They allow moments of quiet reflection. They do not rush to prove their point. They simply express it. In many situations, observers begin to interpret these two styles differently, and the first person may appear eager to win the conversation. The second person appears comfortable participating in it, and comfort often signals strength. This pattern appears across many areas of life: in leadership, in negotiation, in conflict resolution, even in everyday social interactions. The person who can maintain calm clarity while others escalate. Emotion often becomes the stabilizing presence in the room, and people naturally gravitate toward stability. And there is an important reason for this. Human attention is highly sensitive to contrast. When voices become louder and faster, the brain begins to filter them as noise. But when someone speaks calmly, while tension rises around them, that contrast captures attention. Their words stand out, not because they are louder, but because they are clearer. Clarity often travels further than volume. Another important factor is emotional regulation. When someone reacts quickly to every comment, interruption, or disagreement, observers tend to interpret it as reactivity, and reactivity signals that the environment is controlling the person. But when someone responds thoughtfully, taking a moment, choosing their words carefully, it suggests the person is guiding their own behavior. And self-guidance often earns quiet respect. None of this requires dramatic personality changes. It does not require becoming silent or withdrawn. It simply involves learning how to slow the interaction between thought and speech. Many people speak the moment an idea appears, but those who command deeper respect often insert a small moment between the thought and the expression. A pause, not long, just enough to choose the clearest words. That small pause communicates something powerful. It suggests the person values precision more than reaction. and precision tends to elevate credibility. Again, there is also an interesting psychological shift that occurs when someone becomes comfortable speaking softly. When people rely on volume to command attention, they depend on external force. But when someone trusts that their words will be heard without force, they project internal steadiness. This difference may seem subtle, yet humans are highly sensitive to subtle signals. We constantly interpret posture, tone, pacing, and emotional control. These signals shape how others estimate confidence, reliability, and leadership potential, and those estimates influence how much respect they offer. Of course, speaking softly does not mean speaking weakly. There is a difference between softness and hesitation. A soft voice can still carry conviction. In fact, calm conviction often travels further than emotional intensity because it suggests the person has already thought carefully about their position. There is another hidden advantage to measured speech. When you speak less frequently, your words often carry more weight, not because people fear you, but because they learn that when you speak, there is usually something worth hearing. Many individuals dilute their influence simply by speaking constantly. They comment on everything. They fill every silence. Over time, the environment becomes accustomed to filtering their voice as background. But when someone contributes thoughtfully and selectively, attention tends to increase when they do speak. Scarcity often amplifies value. This principle appears not only in economics but in communication as well. Another reason quiet strength commands respect is that it signals emotional discipline. When someone can remain calm while facing disagreement, criticism, or pressure, observers tend to interpret that composure as maturity. It suggests the person is not easily destabilized by external events. And stability is deeply reassuring in uncertain environments. People tend to respect individuals who can regulate themselves before attempting to influence others. This is where the real shift begins. The purpose of speaking softly is not to control people. It is to control your own pace of expression, to ensure that your words serve clarity rather than reaction, to allow thoughtfulness to shape communication. Because when words emerge from reflection rather than impulse, they often carry deeper meaning, and meaning is what people truly listen for. Many individuals chase respect by attempting to appear powerful, but genuine respect tends to grow from something quieter: consistency, composure, clarity. These traits rarely demand attention, yet they frequently attract it. Over time, people begin to notice who remains calm during confusion, who speaks with intention instead of urgency, and who listens before responding, who can hold silence without discomfort. And gradually a subtle shift occurs. When that person begins to speak, others often listen more carefully, not because they are forced to, but because experience has taught them the words are usually worth hearing. This is the foundation of quiet authority. It does not rely on intimidation. It does not depend on dominance. Instead, it grows from self-regulation, from patience, from the discipline of speaking with purpose. Learning. This skill does not happen overnight. Most people were never taught how powerful calm communication can be. They were taught to compete for attention, to respond quickly, to prove themselves constantly. Yet once you begin observing how respected individuals communicate, a different pattern begins to emerge. Their power rarely comes from volume. It comes from presence, from composure, from clarity, gained from a quiet confidence that does not rush to prove itself. In the chapters ahead, we will explore how this kind of communication develops, how calm speech influences perception, how silence can strengthen authority, how emotional regulation shapes credibility, and how thoughtful communication gradually builds respect in professional, social, and personal environments. None of these principles promise instant results. Human relationships evolve over time. But they can significantly increase the likelihood that your words are heard, your presence is valued, and your communication carries weight. Because sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is not the loudest one. It is the one that speaks with calm certainty, and therefore does not need to raise its volume to be taken seriously. And once you understand how that works, you begin to notice something fascinating. Respect often grows in the space between words, and not in the noise that surrounds them. The hidden power of controlled speech. In many environments, communication moves quickly. Ideas overlap, opinions collide, people respond before the previous sentence has even settled in the air. Conversations become competitions of speed rather than exchanges of clarity. At first glance, this pace can feel productive. It creates the impression of engagement and energy. Yet when communication moves too fast, something essential often disappears: thoughtful intention. Controlled speech begins with a simple realization. Not every thought requires immediate expression. This may sound obvious, yet many people rarely practice it. The moment an idea forms, it moves directly to the tongue. The space between thinking and speaking becomes almost non-existent. But that small space, that quiet moment before words emerge, is where respect often begins to form. So when someone consistently allows themselves a brief pause before speaking, observers tend to interpret that behavior in specific ways. They may see it as careful thinking. They may interpret it as composure. They may feel the person is considering the broader context rather than reacting to the surface of the conversation. This does not mean every pause will be interpreted perfectly. Human perception is complex, and different personalities interpret behavior differently, but in many cases, unmeasured responses increase. The likelihood that others perceive you as thoughtful rather than reactive. And thoughtfulness tends to elevate credibility. Consider the difference between two forms of communication. During a disagreement, in the first scenario, a person responds immediately after every point made by the other individual. Their sentences overlap slightly. Their tone may rise in intensity as they attempt to clarify their perspective. Quickly, they are not necessarily aggressive. Might they simply feel compelled to respond immediately? So their viewpoint is not lost. Yet this urgency can unintentionally signal something else, emotional involvement that is beginning to accelerate. Now, consider another response style. A person listens carefully to the entire point before responding. When the other individual finishes speaking, there is a small pause, not an awkward silence, simply a moment of reflection. Then the person answers calmly, addressing the main point rather than every minor detail. In many conversations, this pattern shifts the emotional climate, the pace slows, the focus sharpens, and the dialogue becomes more productive. Why does this happen? Part of the answer lies in how the human brain processes information. When conversations become rapid and emotionally charged, attention tends to fragment. People stop listening fully and instead prepare their next response. But when someone introduces calm pacing into the interaction, it often creates space for deeper listening. That space invites the conversation to become more thoughtful. This is why leaders who communicate with calm precision often influence discussions without raising their voice. Their pacing guides the rhythm of the conversation, and rhythm shapes attention. Another dimension of controlled speech is selectivity. Many people feel an unconscious pressure to comment on every topic that appears in a conversation. Silence may feel uncomfortable, so they fill it with additional explanations, clarifications, or supporting details. Yet the individuals who command the most respect often demonstrate a different pattern. They contribute when their words add value, and they remain comfortable listening when they do not. This restraint does not reduce their presence. In many situations, it strengthens it. Because when someone speaks less frequently, but with greater clarity, the environment begins to associate their voice with meaningful contribution. Over time, this pattern builds a subtle form of influence. People begin to anticipate that when the person speaks, the message will likely be thoughtful, and anticipation increases attention. This is not a technique for controlling others. It is a discipline for managing your own communication energy. Instead of dispersing words constantly, you direct them with intention. That intention becomes visible over time. Another element of controlled speech involves emotional pacing. Every conversation carries emotional undercurrents. Sometimes they are calm. Sometimes they become tense. At other times, they shift unexpectedly. When emotions rise, people often mirror the energy around them without realizing it. If someone raises their voice, the instinctive response may be to raise yours as well. If someone speaks rapidly, you may unconsciously accelerate your own pace. This mirroring happens automatically in many human interactions. However, individuals who cultivate calm communication learn to resist this automatic synchronization. Instead of matching the intensity around them, they stabilize their own tone. They maintain the same measured pacing. They keep their sentences clear and simple, and this stability can influence the emotional climate of the conversation, not always, not instantly, but often enough that people begin to notice the difference. Calm speech tends to slow emotional escalation. When one person remains composed, it becomes easier for others to recalibrate their own tone. This effect is particularly visible in professional environments. In meetings, negotiations, and decision-making discussions, the individual who remains calm, while others grow animated, often becomes a stabilizing reference point. People look to that person when the conversation becomes scattered, not because they are louder, but because they appear grounded. Grounded communication carries a certain psychological weight. It signals that the person is thinking beyond the immediate emotional moment, and that long-term perspective tends to attract respect. Controlled speech also involves clarity. Many individuals speak in long, complex explanations when they feel pressure to prove their competence. They add more examples, more details, more justifications. Ironically, this often reduces the impact of their message. When words accumulate too heavily, listeners begin to lose the central idea. Clarity works differently. A clear communicator focuses on the core message. They remove unnecessary complexity. They express ideas in simple, precise language. And they trust that clarity will carry the message further than volume. This does not mean every sentence must be short or minimal, and rather, the speaker maintains awareness of the listener's cognitive load. They recognize that attention is limited, so they respect that limitation by organizing their thoughts carefully. Respect for attention often leads to respect for the speaker. Another subtle quality of controlled speech is confidence in silence. Silence often feels uncomfortable. In modern conversation, the moment a pause appears, many people rush to fill it. Yet silence can serve important functions. It allows ideas to settle. It gives listeners time to process information. It creates moments where reflection becomes possible. And it demonstrates that the speaker is not anxious about maintaining constant verbal control of the interaction. Comfort with silence suggests emotional stability. It shows the person does not fear temporary quiet moments. And this calm relationship with silence can make communication feel more deliberate. Many experienced communicators use silence as a natural part of speech. They pause after important points. They allow listeners a moment to absorb the message. Then they continue. This pacing increases the likelihood that key ideas remain memorable, because when the brain receives information without pause, it tends to blur together. But when ideas are separated by moments of quiet, they become easier to retain. Controlled speech also reinforces accountability. When someone speaks slowly and thoughtfully, they tend to choose words more carefully. That careful selection reduces the likelihood of impulsive statements that later require correction. Over time, this pattern strengthens credibility. People learn that the person's words are usually consistent with their actions, and consistency forms the backbone of trust. Trust grows gradually. It forms through repeated interactions where behavior aligns with communication. Controlled speech supports this alignment by encouraging reflection before expression. Of course, this discipline requires practice. Most people develop habits of rapid response through years of social conditioning. They are rewarded for quick answers, immediate reactions, constant participation. Slowing down may initially feel unfamiliar. Some people even worry that speaking less frequently will make them appear disengaged. Yet, in many cases, the opposite occurs. When contributions become more thoughtful and concise, attention tends to increase. Listeners begin to recognize that the speaker values quality over quantity, and that recognition strengthens perceived credibility. It is important to understand that controlled speech does not mean suppressing personality. Warmth, humor, enthusiasm, all of these qualities remain valuable in communication. The difference lies in intention. Rather than speaking impulsively, when the speaker becomes aware of when their words will contribute most effectively. This awareness gradually transforms communication from reactive expression into deliberate dialogue. Over time, the benefits accumulate. People begin to notice the consistency. They notice the calm pacing, they notice the clarity, and they begin to associate the speaker with thoughtful presence. Respect rarely arrives through dramatic displays. More often, it develops through repeated demonstrations of composure, clarity, and emotional discipline. Controlled speech is one of the most reliable ways to demonstrate those qualities, not because it forces others to listen, but because it increases the likelihood that when you speak, your words carry intention, and intention is difficult to ignore. The more consistently you practice this discipline, the more your communication begins to shift. Your voice becomes steadier, and your thoughts become more organized, your words become more deliberate, and gradually something subtle begins to happen. Conversations begin to slow down around you, people begin to listen more carefully, and your presence starts to carry a quiet kind of authority, not loud, not forceful, but unmistakably grounded, the most underestimated communication skill. Most people learn how to speak, far fewer learn how to use silence. In many cultures, conversation is treated as a continuous stream. Words fill the air almost without interruption. Pauses are often interpreted as awkward moments that must be quickly repaired with more talking. Yet, silence is not the absence of communication. In many situations, it is a deeper form of it. Silence can signal reflection. It can signal emotional control. It can signal that a person is listening with genuine attention, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. And these signals often influence how others perceive you. When someone becomes comfortable with silence, their communication begins to change. In subtle ways, they stop rushing to fill every pause. They stop reacting instantly to every comment. Instead, they allow the conversation to breathe. This breathing space alters the rhythm of interaction. And rhythm, whether people notice it, consciously or not, shapes how conversations feel. Fast, uninterrupted speech often creates a sense of urgency. It pushes the dialogue forward quickly, sometimes before ideas have been fully understood. Silence slows that momentum, just enough to allow thought to catch up with language. It gives meaning time to settle. Consider a simple scenario. Two people are discussing a challenging topic at work. One person presents a concern about a project. The other person immediately begins responding, explaining, defending, clarifying. Or the response is fast and energetic. But because it begins so quickly, the first person may feel their concern was not fully absorbed. Now imagine a different response. The second person listens until the first has finished speaking. When the sentence ends, there is a short pause, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds. During that pause, the listener considers the concern carefully. Then they respond. The content of the response may be similar to the first scenario, but the explanation may even contain the same points. Yet the experience feels different. The pause signals something important. The listener is taking the concern seriously. They are allowing space for understanding before responding. This small difference often changes the emotional tone of the interaction. Silence can also reduce unnecessary escalation. When conversations become tense, people often respond quickly to defend their position. Words arrive faster. Tone becomes sharper. How do the exchange accelerates? In these moments, a pause can interrupt the acceleration. It creates a moment where emotional momentum slows down. This does not guarantee the tension will disappear, but it often creates an opportunity for a more thoughtful response. And thoughtful responses tend to reduce the likelihood of misunderstandings. Growing larger. Silence also communicates confidence. Many people speak continuously because they worry that if they stop, they might lose the attention of the room. But individuals who feel secure in their message rarely fear. Short pauses, they understand that a moment of quiet does not erase their credibility. In fact, it often strengthens it. When someone pauses after expressing an important idea, listeners often use that moment to process the message. The brain needs time to organize information. Without pauses, ideas blur together. With pauses, ideas become more memorable. This is why experienced public speakers often pause deliberately after key statements, not dramatically, not theatrically, simply enough to allow the audience a moment of reflection. Silence in conversation works in a similar way. It creates moments where meaning can settle. Another powerful function of silence is that it encourages others to speak more openly. When people feel rushed, they tend to compress their thoughts into short responses. But when the listener remains patient and attentive, the speaker often continues exploring their ideas. They elaborate, they clarify, they reveal deeper perspectives. This process happens naturally when the listener does not interrupt the flow with immediate responses. As a result, silence can become a tool for understanding, not a strategy for extracting information, but a posture of genuine listening. And genuine listening often builds respect more effectively than persuasive speech. Because when people feel heard, they tend to view the listener as thoughtful and fair. These perceptions matter. Respect rarely forms from a single impressive statement. It usually develops through repeated interactions, where a person demonstrates attentiveness, patience, and composure. Silence supports all three qualities. However, using silence effectively requires balance. Extended silence can sometimes create confusion if the other person does not understand your intention. The goal is not to withdraw from the conversation. The goal is to allow small, natural pauses that give the interaction space to breathe. These pauses are brief. They occur between ideas, after questions, or before responses. They are subtle enough that most people do not consciously analyze them, yet they still influence the rhythm of communication. Another benefit of silence is that it reduces the pressure to react emotionally. When someone hears a comment they disagree with, the instinctive reaction may be immediate rebuttal. But if a pause occurs, even briefly, the emotional intensity often softens. During that moment, the mind has time to choose a response, instead of delivering a reflex. This shift from reaction to response changes the quality of communication dramatically. Reactive speech often contains unnecessary conflict. Responsive speech tends to contain more clarity. and clarity tends to invite more productive dialogue.
Your silence also allows you to observe more carefully. When people speak continuously, they often focus only on their own message. But when they pause, they have time to notice subtle cues in the environment. Tone shifts, facial expressions, changes in energy within the conversation. These signals provide useful context. They help you understand not only what someone is saying, but how they are experiencing the interaction. Awareness of these signals improves communication accuracy.
Which because words alone rarely carry the full meaning of a message. Tone and emotional context matter as well. Silence creates room to perceive those layers. There is another interesting aspect of silence that many people overlook. When you pause before responding, you demonstrate that your words are chosen rather than automatic. People tend to respect communication that appears intentional. Intentional speech suggests discipline. It suggests that the speaker values precision over speed. And precision often increases credibility. Over time, individuals who practice this approach develop a reputation for thoughtful communication. Others begin to recognize that when they speak, their responses are rarely impulsive. This perception strengthens trust. Trust grows when people believe your words reflect careful thought rather than temporary emotion. And trust is one of the foundations of respect. Silence also prevents unnecessary over-explanation. It's when people feel anxious about being misunderstood, they sometimes add too many details to their statements. They repeat the same idea in several different ways. Ironically, this often makes the message harder to follow. Pausing allows the speaker to evaluate whether additional explanation is truly needed. Often, it is not. A clear sentence, followed by a moment of quiet, can carry more weight than a long paragraph filled with repeated justification. Might learning to tolerate silence may feel uncomfortable at first. Many people associate silence with uncertainty, but with practice, that association begins to change. Silence becomes a tool for clarity rather than a signal of hesitation. You begin to recognize that not every second of conversation must contain sound. Meaning can travel through the spaces between words as well. In fact, those spaces often determine how the words are received. A rushed sentence may sound defensive. And the same sentence, delivered with calm, pacing and a brief pause, may sound confident. The content remains identical, but the rhythm changes the perception. Communication is not only about what you say, it is also about how your presence shapes the emotional environment of the conversation. Silence helps shape that environment. It slows the tempo, it encourages reflection, it allows understanding to deepen before new ideas arrive. Over time, this practice begins to influence how others approach conversations with you. They notice that interactions with you feel calmer, more deliberate, less chaotic. As a result, they may become more thoughtful in their own responses as well. This mutual adjustment creates a more balanced exchange of ideas. And balanced exchanges often generate greater respect between participants, because respect tends to grow. In environments where people feel heard, understood, and given space to express themselves, silence contributes to that environment in ways words sometimes cannot. It reminds everyone involved that communication is not a race. It is a process of understanding, and understanding often grows best in moments of quiet reflection. When you learn to value silence alongside speech, your communication begins to carry a different kind of presence. Your words become more deliberate. Your listening becomes more attentive. Your responses become more thoughtful. And gradually, the conversations around you begin to change, not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. People begin to notice the difference. They notice the calm pacing. They notice the thoughtful pauses. They notice the sense that when you speak, your words arrive from reflection rather than impulse. And that perception quietly strengthens the respect your presence receives, the foundation of quiet authority, i.e. one of the most powerful forms of communication. Rarely appears in the words themselves, it appears in emotional stability. People often focus on language when they want to improve communication. They study persuasive phrases, negotiation tactics, and confident speaking techniques. Those tools can be useful. But beneath all language lies something deeper: emotional regulation. If emotions move faster than thought, communication becomes reactive. If thought guides emotion,
communication becomes intentional. This distinction may seem subtle, yet it often determines whether someone is perceived as steady or unpredictable. And steadiness tends to earn respect. Emotional regulation does not mean suppressing feelings. Human emotions exist for important reasons. They help people interpret situations, detect potential problems, and connect with others. However, when emotions dictate immediate reactions, communication often becomes less precise.
the words arrive before reflection has had time to organize them. This is where calm authority begins, not in controlling others, but in guiding your own internal responses before expressing them externally. Imagine a meeting where a disagreement emerges. One participant reacts immediately. Their tone sharpens slightly. Their explanation grows longer as they attempt to defend their position. They are not hostile. They simply feel the pressure of the moment and respond quickly. Another participant notices the disagreement, but they take a brief moment before speaking. They breathe, they organize their thoughts, then they respond with measured clarity. Both individuals may care equally about the outcome, but their pacing creates very different impressions. The first response appears emotionally involved in the immediate exchange. The second response appears grounded in reflection. Observers often associate that grounded behavior with maturity and reliability. Over time, those associations influence who people listen to most carefully. This does not mean calm individuals are always correct, and it does not mean emotionally expressive individuals lack insight. Human communication is more complex than simple categories, but emotional stability often increases the likelihood that others view your perspective as thoughtful. Part of this effect comes from how human attention works during tense moments. When conversations become emotionally charged, the people instinctively search for signals that indicate safety or stability. They look for someone who appears composed, someone who is not escalating the tension, someone who can maintain clarity. When such a person is present, the group often gravitates toward them. Not because they demand authority, but because their composure provides orientation in a moment of uncertainty. This is one reason calm leaders tend to influence group decisions more effectively, and their stability reduces the emotional noise that often clouds judgment. Emotional regulation also protects the quality of your message. When emotions surge, language can become exaggerated. People may use stronger words than they intended. They may generalize situations too broadly. They may speak in ways that create unnecessary defensiveness in others. These patterns rarely strengthen communication. They usually make understanding more difficult. But when emotional intensity is managed before speaking, language becomes more precise. Instead of reacting to the emotional energy of the moment, the speaker chooses words that address the actual issue. Precision often lowers conflict. Not because disagreement disappears, but because the conversation remains focused on ideas rather than emotional reactions. Another aspect of emotional regulation is resilience to provocation. In many environments, people occasionally encounter criticism, or frustration, or challenging feedback. When these moments occur, reactions often reveal more about a person's internal stability than their words ever could. If someone becomes defensive immediately, observers may interpret that reaction as insecurity. But if someone listens calmly, acknowledges the point being made, and responds thoughtfully, the perception changes. It suggests confidence in their ability to examine ideas without feeling threatened by them. This does not mean accepting every criticism without question. Healthy communication includes evaluating feedback critically. However, the ability to consider feedback without emotional escalation often strengthens credibility. It signals that the person values understanding more than immediate validation. That mindset tends to earn respect over time. Emotional regulation also improves listening. When emotions dominate the internal dialogue, attention narrows. Instead of hearing the full message, the mind focuses on preparing its defense. This reduces the ability to absorb important information. But when emotional responses are moderated, attention becomes wider. The listener can consider the entire perspective before forming a reply. This deeper listening often leads to more constructive conversations, because people feel their viewpoints are being genuinely considered. And when people feel understood, they tend to respond with greater openness. Another benefit of emotional regulation is consistency. People tend to trust individuals whose reactions are predictable in a positive way. Predictable does not mean rigid. It means stable. It means others can expect the person to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Consistency builds confidence in relationships. When someone repeatedly demonstrates calm responses across different situations, their reputation begins to solidify. And others start to associate them with reliability. And reliability forms the foundation of long-term respect. Of course, emotional regulation requires awareness. Before someone can guide their reactions, they must first recognize them. This begins by noticing early signs of emotional acceleration, a faster heartbeat, a sudden urge to interrupt, a strong impulse to respond immediately. These signals often indicate that emotions are beginning to influence communication speed. And when you notice them, a simple pause can create space for reflection. A single breath, a brief moment of silence. These small actions may seem insignificant, yet they often prevent reactive language from appearing. Instead of speaking from the peak of emotion, you allow the intensity to settle slightly. Then your words emerge from a clearer mental state. Over time, this practice becomes more natural. The pause no longer feels forced. It becomes a normal part of how you communicate. And this does not eliminate emotion from conversation. Emotion remains an important part of human expression, but it becomes integrated with thought rather than dominating it. That balance strengthens the quality of dialogue. Another important element of emotional regulation is self-accountability. Calm communicators recognize that their words carry influence. Because of this, they take responsibility for the emotional tone they introduce into conversations. If tension rises, they ask themselves whether their phrasing contributed to the escalation. If misunderstandings occur, they reflect on how their communication might become clearer. This willingness to examine one's own role in interactions fosters personal growth. It shifts communication from blame toward improvement. And individuals who demonstrate this level of accountability often earn deeper respect. People recognize that the person is committed to learning rather than defending every action. One that humility strengthens credibility. Because confidence paired with accountability tends to feel trustworthy. Emotional regulation also protects long-term relationships. In moments of frustration, people sometimes say things they later regret. Words spoken during emotional peaks can leave lasting impressions even after apologies. By slowing communication. During these moments, many unnecessary conflicts can be avoided, but the conversation remains focused on resolving the issue rather than repairing emotional damage afterward. This approach preserves mutual respect. Not every disagreement needs to become a confrontation. Many can remain calm exchanges of perspective. Over time, individuals who practice emotional regulation develop a quiet form of influence. Their presence begins to shape the atmosphere of conversations. When discussions become intense, others often look toward them as a stabilizing presence, not because they dominate the discussion, but because they help maintain clarity. Clarity is valuable in complex situations. It allows groups to move forward with better understanding, and the person who consistently supports that clarity often becomes a trusted voice. This influence does not require dramatic displays of authority. It grows slowly through consistent behavior, through calm responses, through thoughtful listening, through measured speech. Each interaction becomes a small demonstration of emotional discipline, and over time, those demonstrations accumulate. People begin to recognize a pattern. They realize that when challenges arise, this person rarely reacts impulsively. They respond with reflection, and that reliability strengthens respect. Quiet authority does not demand recognition. It simply reveals itself through repeated moments of stability, through calm communication. When tension appears, through thoughtful responses, when quick reactions might be easier, through emotional awareness that guides words rather than chasing them. When you develop this ability, your communication gains a different quality. Your words become steadier. Your presence becomes grounding, and your influence grows, not from force, but from the quiet trust that stability creates. Why people listen more carefully to calm voices. In almost every group setting, something subtle happens when multiple people begin speaking at once. Voices rise, pacing accelerates. Each person tries to ensure their perspective is heard before the conversation moves on. This reaction is natural. Human beings often associate speed and intensity with urgency. When an idea feels important, the instinct may be to emphasize it quickly and forcefully. Yet, in the middle of this noise, another pattern often emerges. Sometimes a person speaks with a calm, steady voice, slower than the surrounding conversation. Their tone is not dramatic. Their words are not rushed. And surprisingly, the room often becomes quieter when they begin speaking. This reaction does not occur in every situation. Human attention is influenced by many variables: personalities, power dynamics, emotional context. But calm voices frequently draw attention for a simple psychological reason. Contrast. When an environment becomes loud or hurried, the brain begins filtering information rapidly. Much of what is said blends together. But when someone speaks with composure and clarity, within that environment, the contrast becomes noticeable. The mind instinctively shifts attention toward what feels different. This does not require volume. In many cases, a calm voice can travel further across attention than a loud one, because calmness often signals confidence. Then confidence attracts curiosity. People begin to wonder why the speaker feels comfortable enough to remain steady when others are escalating. That curiosity invites listening. Another reason calm voices hold attention is that they suggest certainty without pressure. When someone speaks quickly and forcefully, listeners sometimes interpret the urgency as an attempt to secure agreement. Even when the intention is simply enthusiasm, the speed may create subtle resistance. Listeners may feel pushed rather than invited to consider the idea. Calm speech works differently. It presents the message with space. Instead of pressing the listener toward immediate agreement, it offers the thought clearly and allows others to reflect. This difference can significantly influence how ideas are received. Ideas delivered calmly often feel easier to evaluate. They arrive without the emotional force that sometimes triggers defensiveness. And when people feel less defensive, they tend to listen more carefully. There is also an interesting relationship between calm speech and perceived competence. When individuals appear comfortable speaking at a measured pace, observers often interpret that behavior as a sign that the person understands the subject well. Why? Because people who feel uncertain about their knowledge sometimes rush their explanations. They may worry that hesitation will expose gaps in their thinking. As a result, they speak faster, adding more words to reinforce their position. However, someone who is confident in their understanding usually feels less pressure to rush. They trust that their message will remain intact even if they pause occasionally. This trust becomes visible in their pacing, and others interpret that pacing as competence. Again, this perception is not perfect. A calm voice alone does not prove expertise. But human judgments are often influenced by subtle behavioral cues. A measured speech tends to signal preparation and clarity. Another advantage of calm communication is that it allows the listener's mind to keep pace with the message. When ideas arrive too quickly, comprehension declines. The brain struggles to organize incoming information while also preparing responses. This cognitive overload reduces attention, but when speech slows slightly, comprehension improves. Keen listeners can absorb each idea before the next one appears. As understanding grows, engagement grows with it. People tend to listen more carefully when they feel they are keeping up with the conversation rather than chasing it. Calm speech also affects emotional perception. When someone communicates with steady tone and relaxed pacing, they often appear emotionally balanced. This perception matters more than many people realize. In group environments, emotional stability frequently influences who others look to for guidance. When uncertainty or disagreement appears, people naturally observe who remains composed. That composure becomes a reference point. Not because the calm individual demands authority, but because their behavior suggests clarity in a moment of confusion. This dynamic appears in many leadership situations. During complex discussions, the person who maintains calm focus often becomes the anchor of the conversation. Others begin directing questions toward them. They wait for that person's perspective before finalizing decisions. This shift rarely happens instantly. It develops gradually as people observe consistent calm responses across multiple interactions. Consistency strengthens credibility, and credibility strengthens influence. Another factor that makes calm voices effective is their ability to reduce conversational competition. When multiple people are trying to speak loudly and the environment becomes adversarial, participants feel they must defend their speaking space. But when someone enters the conversation with a composed tone and deliberate pacing, the dynamic can shift. Their style encourages others to slow down. Instead of competing, for the next word, participants begin listening more attentively. This shift does not occur every time. Some environments remain fast-paced, regardless of individual behavior. But in many situations, calm speech introduces a stabilizing rhythm, and rhythm often shapes the direction of dialogue. There is also a connection between calm voices and perceived fairness. People who speak aggressively may appear invested in winning the conversation, but calm speakers often appear invested in understanding the conversation. That distinction influences trust. When listeners believe the speaker values balanced discussion rather than dominance, they are more willing to engage with the ideas presented. They feel respected as participants in the dialogue. And when people feel respected, they listen more openly. Calm speech, therefore, supports mutual understanding rather than one-sided persuasion. Another subtle benefit of calm communication is the ability to emphasize key ideas more effectively. When someone speaks rapidly without pauses, all sentences carry similar weight. The listener struggles to identify which ideas are most important. But when speech contains natural pauses and varied pacing, certain statements stand out. A brief pause before a key idea prepares the listener's attention. A calm delivery allows the message to land clearly. This technique does not require theatrical performance. It simply involves awareness of rhythm. The speaker recognizes that communication is not only about the content of words, but also about their timing. Timing shapes perception. An idea delivered at the right moment with the right pacing often carries greater impact than a long explanation delivered quickly. Calm voices also tend to invite questions rather than resistance. When people feel pressured, they may respond defensively. But when the message is delivered with composure, listeners often feel comfortable. Exploring the idea further, they ask clarifying questions. They engage more deeply with the discussion. How this creates a collaborative atmosphere rather than a competitive one, and collaboration tends to produce more thoughtful outcomes. It is important to remember that calm speech does not mean passive speech. A calm communicator can still express strong viewpoints. They can still challenge ideas respectfully. They can still advocate for important decisions. The difference lies in emotional tone. Instead of projecting urgency or pressure, they project steadiness. Note that steadiness often increases the likelihood that their message is heard clearly. Over time, individuals who consistently communicate this way develop a distinct presence. When they enter conversations, the atmosphere subtly adjusts. People expect thoughtful contributions. They anticipate measured perspectives. And because of that expectation, attention increases when the person begins speaking. Respect begins to form around the reliability of their communication style. Not around dominance, not around volume, but around consistency. Consistency in tone, consistency in pacing, consistency in thoughtful engagement. These patterns gradually shape how others perceive your voice within a group. They begin to associate your presence with clarity and composure. And when clarity and composure become part of your reputation, your words often carry greater influence. Not because you force attention, but because your calm presence naturally attracts it. This is one of the quiet dynamics behind respected communicators. They do not chase attention, they create conditions where attention naturally settles around their words, through measured speech, through emotional stability, through consistent clarity, and through a voice that remains steady, even when the conversation around it becomes loud. The discipline of speaking with intention. Most conversations happen automatically. Words appear, reactions follow, and dialogue moves forward, almost without reflection. People respond based on habit, emotion, and the immediate rhythm of the interaction. In fast-moving environments, this automatic communication becomes the norm. Yet individuals who command deep respect often operate differently. Their speech is not accidental, it is intentional. Intentional speech does not mean rehearsed or artificial language. It means that the speaker remains aware of why they are speaking and what they hope. Their words will contribute to the conversation. This awareness changes the quality of communication. Instead of speaking simply to participate, the person speaks to clarify. Instead of reacting impulsively, they respond with purpose, and this difference becomes noticeable over time. One of the first aspects of intentional speech is clarity of objective. Before speaking, unintentional communicators often ask themselves a simple internal question: what will this sentence add to the conversation? Sometimes the answer is clear. It might offer useful information. It might provide a thoughtful perspective. It might ask a question that helps everyone think more carefully. But sometimes the answer is less meaningful. The sentence might simply repeat what has already been said, or it might express a reaction that adds more emotion than clarity. When intentional communicators recognize this difference, they often choose silence. Not because they lack thoughts, but because they value precision. This discipline gradually changes how others perceive their contributions. When someone consistently speaks with purpose, listeners begin to associate their voice with relevance. They expect that when this person speaks, the words will likely move the conversation forward. That expectation increases attention. Another aspect of intentional speech involves selecting the right moment to speak. Timing can influence communication. As much as the words themselves, imagine a discussion where several people are expressing strong opinions at once. The conversation becomes layered with competing viewpoints. In that moment, introducing another rapid opinion may not improve understanding. Intentional communicators often wait. They observe the flow of the dialogue. They listen to each perspective. Then, when the conversation reaches a natural pause, they contribute their thoughts with clarity. Because the timing aligns with a moment of openness, the message often receives more careful consideration. This patience does not mean hesitation. It reflects awareness that communication is a shared rhythm. Speaking at the right moment can amplify the impact of even simple ideas. Another quality of intentional speech is conciseness, i.e., many people assume that longer explanations appear more intelligent or persuasive. Yet, extended explanations sometimes reduce clarity. The listener must sift through many sentences to find the central idea. Intentional communicators often aim for the opposite. They focus on expressing the core message as clearly as possible. They remove unnecessary complexity. They trust that a well-structured sentence can communicate more effectively than a long series of loosely connected thoughts. This discipline requires preparation of the mind. Before speaking, the communicator organizes the idea internally. They identify the main point. They consider how it relates to the conversation. Then they express it in a form that is easy to follow. Listeners often appreciate this clarity. It respects their attention. It acknowledges that people process information more effectively when ideas are presented simply. Intentional speech also involves responsibility for tone. The words carry emotional weight beyond their literal meaning. The same sentence can feel supportive or confrontational, depending on how it is delivered. Thoughtful communicators remain aware of this dimension. They choose phrasing that expresses their ideas firmly while maintaining respect for the listener. This balance strengthens dialogue. Strong ideas can be communicated clearly without creating unnecessary friction. And when people feel respected, and they are more willing to consider viewpoints that differ from their own. Intentional speech therefore supports productive disagreement. Instead of attempting to defeat opposing views, the speaker engages with them thoughtfully. They focus on explaining their reasoning. They acknowledge the complexity of the topic, and they invite the conversation to explore solutions rather than escalate conflict. This approach often encourages others to respond in a similar tone. Communication becomes collaborative rather than adversarial. Another important element of intentional speech is self-awareness. Every person brings personal experiences, biases, and emotions into conversations. These influences shape how ideas are expressed. Intentional communicators recognize that their perspective is one piece of a larger dialogue. Because of this awareness, they remain open to refinement. If new information appears, they adjust their understanding. If someone offers a valuable insight, they acknowledge it. This flexibility strengthens credibility. People tend to respect individuals who demonstrate confidence alongside openness to learning. Confidence shows commitment to ideas. Openness shows commitment to truth. Together, they create balanced communication. Intentional speech also includes the ability to ask thoughtful questions. Questions can guide conversations toward deeper understanding, and instead of presenting every thought. As a statement, intentional communicators sometimes ask questions that invite reflection. For example, rather than immediately challenging an idea, they might ask how the idea developed, or what outcomes the speaker hopes to achieve. These questions encourage exploration rather than confrontation. They help reveal the reasoning behind perspectives, and they allow the conversation to expand rather than narrow. Another advantage of intentional speech is that it prevents unnecessary repetition. In many discussions, participants restate their arguments multiple times in slightly different forms. This repetition often occurs because people feel their points were not fully acknowledged. Intentional communicators listen carefully to determine whether repetition is truly necessary. If their idea has already been expressed clearly, they may choose to let it stand. This restraint shows confidence in their message. It signals that they trust listeners to consider the point without constant reinforcement. Over time, this pattern strengthens the perceived value of their contributions. Because their words do not flood the conversation, they remain distinct. Listeners remember them more easily. Intentional speech also protects long-term credibility. When someone speaks impulsively, they sometimes make statements that later require clarification or correction. Frequent corrections can weaken trust in communication. But when speech is guided by reflection, the likelihood of these missteps decreases. The speaker's words become more consistent with their thinking. Consistency reinforces reliability, and reliability supports respect. Developing intentional speech requires patience. Many people have spent years communicating through rapid reactions. Changing this habit takes practice. At first, the pauses before speaking may feel unfamiliar. The discipline of organizing thoughts before expressing them may require conscious effort. But gradually the process becomes natural. The mind learns to filter ideas quickly. It identifies which thoughts contribute meaningfully to the conversation, and it expresses them with greater clarity. As this ability develops, communication begins to feel more balanced. Conversations become less rushed, and ideas become easier to follow. Misunderstandings decrease. Others may begin to notice that interactions with you feel calmer and more productive, not because you dominate discussions, but because your words tend to guide them toward clarity. This influence is quiet but powerful. It does not rely on authority or status. It grows from the consistent demonstration of thoughtful communication. People begin to recognize that when you speak, your intention is constructive, but your contributions help move the conversation forward. And because of that, they listen more closely. Intentional speech therefore becomes a foundation of quiet respect, not because it forces attention, but because it earns it through consistency. Every carefully chosen sentence becomes a small signal of discipline. Every thoughtful pause becomes a sign of reflection. Every clear idea reinforces the perception that your words carry purpose. Over time, this pattern shapes how others experience your presence in dialogue. They no longer expect noise. They expect meaning, and meaning delivered with calm intention often commands a deeper kind of respect. The quiet skill that builds influence. When people think about powerful communication, they usually think about speaking. Strong arguments, clear explanations, persuasive language. But some of the most respected communicators develop their influence through something much quieter. They listen exceptionally well. Listening may appear passive on the surface, yet in reality, it is one of the most active skills in human interaction. It requires attention. It requires patience. It requires the ability to suspend your own response long enough to fully understand someone else's perspective. And when this kind of listening is present, people tend to notice it immediately. Well, many conversations today operate on a different pattern. While one person speaks, the other person prepares their reply. They are technically hearing the words, but their mind is already organizing the next statement. This habit is extremely common. It happens in workplaces, friendships, family discussions, and even professional negotiations. The result is that both individuals feel partially heard, but rarely fully understood. When someone breaks this pattern, by listening carefully and patiently, the difference becomes clear. They maintain attention, they allow the speaker to complete their thoughts, they observe not only the words, but the intention behind them. This level of listening changes the quality of the interaction. The speaker senses that their message is being received rather than simply processed. And when people feel genuinely heard, they often respond with greater openness and respect. Key listening, well, does not mean agreeing with everything that is said. It means understanding the message clearly before forming a response. This distinction matters because many conflicts escalate not from disagreement itself, but from misunderstanding. Two people believe they are responding to each other's ideas, when in reality, they are responding to incomplete interpretations. Thoughtful listening reduces this risk by absorbing the full message. First, the listener can respond more accurately. This accuracy improves the quality of the conversation. It also demonstrates intellectual respect. The speaker recognizes that their perspective was considered seriously rather than dismissed quickly. Over time, this behavior builds credibility. People begin to trust that conversations with you will be fair. They know their words will not be interrupted or misrepresented. That trust encourages more honest dialogue.
An honest dialogue often leads to better outcomes. Another advantage of deep listening is that it reveals information many others miss. When people rush to respond, they often overlook subtle details in what is being said. They focus on the obvious points, but miss the underlying concerns or motivations. A patient listener notices these layers. They hear not only the statement, but the context around it. For example, someone might express frustration about a project deadline.
A reactive listener may immediately defend the timeline or explain the constraints, but a thoughtful listener might recognize that the frustration could be connected to workload, communication gaps, or uncertainty about priorities. By understanding these underlying factors, the listener can respond in a way that addresses the real issue rather than only the surface complaint. This depth of understanding improves problem solving. It also strengthens relationships, because people tend to respect individuals who demonstrate genuine interest in their perspective. Listening also communicates humility. When someone dominates conversations with constant statements, others may interpret it as an attempt to control the dialogue. But when someone listens attentively before contributing, it signals that they value other viewpoints. This posture does not weaken authority. In many situations, it strengthens it, because authority grounded in understanding tends to feel more trustworthy than authority expressed through constant assertion. Another important function of listening is that it helps refine your own thinking. When you truly absorb different perspectives, your understanding of a situation becomes more complete. You may discover factors you had not previously considered. You may recognize assumptions that require adjustment. This process improves the quality of your eventual response. Your words become more informed, and informed responses often carry more credibility. People notice when someone has clearly taken the time to understand the discussion. Their comments feel grounded in the full context rather than isolated fragments. Listening also encourages collaboration. In conversations where participants feel heard, they become more willing to engage constructively. Instead of defending their positions rigidly, they explore possibilities. They consider adjustments. They search for solutions that benefit everyone involved. This shift from defensive dialogue to cooperative dialogue can dramatically improve outcomes in professional and personal environments. Another aspect of listening that often goes unnoticed is its influence on emotional tone. When someone speaks without interruption, they are able to express their ideas fully. This process can reduce frustration, when people often become less defensive, simply because they had the opportunity to articulate their thoughts clearly. The listener does not need to solve every concern immediately. Sometimes the act of listening itself creates enough space for tension to decrease. Once emotions settle, productive conversation becomes easier. Listening, therefore, acts as a stabilizing force in communication. It slows the pace, it lowers unnecessary friction, and it allows ideas to emerge more clearly. However, effective listening requires discipline. The mind naturally wants to respond quickly. Thoughts appear as soon as someone begins speaking. You may notice yourself preparing arguments, explanations, or corrections before the other person finishes their sentence. When this happens, it helps to return attention to the speaker. Focus on the message rather than the response. Allow the idea to reach completion, then reflect briefly before replying. This habit takes practice, but the benefits are significant. Your responses become more relevant, misunderstandings decrease, and people recognize the care you bring to the interaction. Another skillful aspect of listening is acknowledging what you heard. Simple reflections, such as summarizing a key point or confirming understanding, can demonstrate that you truly absorbed the message. This does not require repeating every detail. It simply involves recognizing the core idea before moving forward. Like when people see that their thoughts were accurately understood, they feel respected. That feeling often increases their willingness to listen to your perspective in return. Listening also protects against unnecessary conflict. When disagreements arise, the first instinct may be to defend your viewpoint quickly. But if you pause and listen fully, you may discover that the disagreement is smaller than it initially appeared. And sometimes the other person is emphasizing a different aspect of the same goal. Other times they possess information you had not yet considered. By listening, first, you ensure that your response addresses the real difference rather than a misunderstanding. This approach saves time and preserves relationships. Over time, individuals who consistently listen well develop a reputation for thoughtful engagement, and others seek their perspective. Because they trust the conversation will be fair and constructive, they know their words will not be dismissed casually, and they know that when the listener eventually speaks, the response will likely reflect a deep understanding of the situation. This reputation strengthens influence naturally, not through force or persuasion, but through credibility. People value voices that demonstrate respect for the complexity of ideas. Listening communicates that respect. It shows that the speaker values truth and understanding more than immediate dominance in the conversation. That attitude resonates with others because everyone appreciates being heard, and those who make others feel heard often receive the same consideration in return. In this way, listening becomes one of the quiet foundations of respectful communication. It supports calm speech, it strengthens emotional regulation, it deepens understanding, and it gradually builds trust. Trust, once established through consistent behavior, transforms the nature of conversations. People begin to approach discussions with openness rather than caution. They know the dialogue will remain balanced. They know their ideas will receive genuine consideration. And in that environment, your voice begins to carry greater weight, not because it is louder, but because it is grounded in understanding, and understanding, expressed through thoughtful listening, often commands a deeper form of respect than any speech alone. The quiet power of lasting respect. As we bring this journey to a close, it is worth reflecting on what we have explored. Speaking softly, while commanding respect, is not a single act. It is a series of intentional practices cultivated over time that shape how others perceive and respond to you. It is not about loudness, dominance, or superficial charm. It is about alignment between your inner state, your words, your presence, and your attention. Think back to the principles we've discussed. Intentional speech, carefully chosen words, and measured tone. Create a framework where clarity is respected. Listening deeply and without interruption signals engagement and consideration. Presence communicates stability and attentiveness, often before a single word is uttered. Composure under pressure demonstrates emotional maturity, resilience, And reliability. Integration of these elements does not require formal authority, status, or dominance. It is built on consistency, awareness, and ethical application. The first step toward this transformation begins within. Notice how you naturally respond in conversation. Observe the patterns of your speech. Do you rush? Do you repeat yourself? Do you respond impulsively? Become aware of how your body expresses emotion, your posture, your gestures, your eye contact. Co-observe the moments when listening becomes reactive rather than attentive. Awareness alone is the foundation for change. It allows you to identify where your habits either enhance or diminish the respect others afford you. Next comes conscious practice. Awareness without action does little to create lasting change. Begin by introducing small adjustments into your daily interactions. Pause before responding to complex questions. Practice speaking in measured tones. Non-focus on one conversation per day where you listen fully, resisting the urge to interject prematurely. Notice the subtle shifts in the responses you receive. Over time, these adjustments compound, creating a new default mode of communication: intentional, calm, and clear. Clarity remains one of the most underestimated elements of influence. People often equate long-winded explanations with intelligence or authority, but simplicity and precision frequently achieve far more. Clear ideas reduce cognitive friction. They allow listeners to grasp your intent quickly. They invite reflection, engagement, and understanding. When you speak with clarity, your words become a bridge rather than a barrier. Others can connect with your thoughts effortlessly, and that ease naturally fosters respect. Equally important is the cultivation of presence. Presence is the silent communication that occurs before, during, and after you speak. It is the calm steadiness that signals to others you are fully engaged, fully aware, and fully attentive. It is expressed through posture, eye contact, gestures, and subtle energy. Presence anchors the conversation, stabilizes tension, and signals that the space around you is organized and intentional. People respond not just to what you say, but to how your presence shapes the environment in which those words arrive. Listening completes the cycle of effective communication. Listening is not passive. It is an active, disciplined skill that strengthens trust, reduces miscommunication, and amplifies influence. By truly absorbing the ideas and emotions expressed by others, you create an environment where dialogue is productive, misunderstandings are minimized, and mutual respect flourishes. Listening conveys the message, "I value your perspective." That acknowledgement often encourages reciprocity, where your words, in turn, receive greater attention and consideration. Composure, particularly under pressure, is the proving ground for these skills. Calmness is more noticeable in high-stakes situations because it contrasts with the frantic or reactive behavior of others. Maintaining your voice, presence, and clarity when emotions rise communicates more than words can. It demonstrates discipline, control, and confidence, qualities that people respect even in the absence of formal authority. This quiet steadiness becomes a reference point for others, i.e. guiding the pace, tone, and quality of interactions organically. Integration is the final layer. Speaking softly, listening fully, being present, expressing clarity, and maintaining composure are most effective when they operate together as a system. One without the others is limited. Words without presence feel shallow. Listening without clarity loses impact. Composure without engagement can feel detached. Integration ensures that each element reinforces the others, at creating a communication style that is consistent, reliable, and universally respected. The long-term impact of these practices extends beyond individual conversations. As you consistently apply these principles, you build a reputation, a quiet authority that does not need to be announced. People begin to anticipate your presence and contributions. They approach interactions with trust, openness, and attentiveness. They respect your perspective. Not because it is demanded, but because it is repeatedly demonstrated. Influence is earned through consistency, not coercion. Consider how this approach translates across different contexts. In professional settings, it positions you as a calm, thoughtful contributor whose ideas carry weight. In social contexts, it creates meaningful connections and strengthens relationships. In moments of conflict, it fosters resolution rather than escalation. The principles are universal. They apply to leadership, collaboration, negotiation, and everyday interactions. They are not confined to specific cultures, industries, or circumstances. They leverage the natural human tendencies toward attention, fairness, and reciprocity to cultivate respect ethically and sustainably. Perhaps most importantly, these skills reinforce internal growth. Practicing calm speech, intentional presence, listening, clarity, and composure develops self-awareness, emotional regulation, and personal responsibility. You learn to observe your thoughts. Before speaking, manage your internal state and respond strategically rather than reactively. This internal alignment enhances not only how others perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself. You gain confidence, grounded in competence and discipline rather than in ego or external validation. It is crucial to remember that respect is not a transaction. It cannot be demanded through volume, force, or superficial tactics. A lasting respect emerges naturally from patterns of behavior that demonstrate value, thoughtfulness, and reliability. Speaking softly does not equate to weakness. It demonstrates control, intentionality, and ethical influence. Those who combine measured speech with presence, listening, clarity, and composure often find that their voice carries weight, far beyond what sheer volume or aggression could achieve. The transformation is gradual. It begins with awareness, grows through disciplined practice, and matures through consistent integration. Each conversation is an opportunity to reinforce these principles. Each interaction, no matter how brief, becomes a microcosm of the larger framework. Over time, what was once deliberate becomes habitual. Calm speech, clear expression, attentive presence, and composure evolve from conscious effort into an intuitive mode of interaction. And when this integration occurs, we realize that influence and respect do not need to be asserted. They emerge naturally. Others seek your perspective, value your input, and consider your words carefully. Conversations become smoother, conflicts less frequent, and collaboration more effective. Your communication has become both a tool and a reflection of your inner discipline, a mirror of your capacity to act with awareness, integrity, and calm authority. Ultimately, the power of speaking softly while commanding absolute respect is the power of consistency aligned with intention. It is the ability to act with awareness in every interaction, to anchor dialogue with calmness, and to communicate with clarity and purpose. It is the art of shaping conversations ethically, ensuring that every word, pause, and gesture contributes to understanding, trust, and mutual respect. By adopting this approach, you enter a space where your voice is heard. Not because it is loud, but because it carries meaning. Where your presence is noticed, not because it demands attention, but because it stabilizes the environment. Where your composure is recognized, not because it shields vulnerability, but because it demonstrates discipline and clarity. And where your listening is valued, not because it defers to others, but because it signals thoughtful engagement. This framework is a lifelong practice, or it grows as you grow. Each day provides opportunities to refine your speech, adjust your presence, and deepen your listening. With dedication, these principles become an inseparable part of how you navigate interactions, an embodiment of quiet authority and ethical influence. Remember, true respect is never forced. It is earned, nurtured, and reinforced through consistent, intentional behavior. And when you speak softly, yet embody presence, clarity, listening, and composure, respect flows naturally in return. It is lasting, it is authentic, and it is profoundly powerful. The journey does not end here. Every conversation, meeting, and interaction becomes another opportunity to practice, to refine, and to grow. Step forward with calm confidence. Let your presence speak before your words. Let clarity guide your thoughts. Listen deeply, respond intentionally. And through this disciplined practice, you will find that respect, true, enduring respect, is not only possible, it becomes the natural outcome of the way you show up in the world.